I have been looking forward to this conversation for a really long time. Here's why I'm looking forward to the conversation, you guys. We might as well just let this be the intro and just roll with it. But I am so sick and tired of misinformation in this business. And I want you guys to just shoot straight with me. Like, just shoot straight with me. Like, I know Richmond is going to shoot straight with me. And I feel like Lori Kilkelly, because I follow you on Twitter, you will also shoot straight with me.
So, yes, I have opinions.
Can you just, most of the time, because I do live here in South Florida, I hear people's opinions and I go, opinions are like assholes. Everybody has one and you all need to keep them covered up. I'd like to continue to be friends with you. But in this situation, let's just uncover our opinions. I think that a lot of writers need like a dose of reality. And it's funny because I think there are plenty of people who are kind of like willing to sort of like pull back the curtain and tell you what the reality is in publishing. But there are still a lot of writers who think that we're all those special geniuses who the reality doesn't apply to us. But I think the truth is the reality applies to everyone that's out there right now. And so I see the struggle, not just like for myself, but with all the writers that I deal with every day. I work for a writing startup company. I work with writers every single day. And I know how like beautiful and optimistic with these rosy dreams that we all have. And I think you have to have those at the beginning in order to even like consider getting into this business. But at some point, somebody has to sort of shatter that, and you need a really realistic picture because you need a strategy. And in order to have a valid strategy that's going to serve you well, I think you need to have some truth injected into it. And so thank you guys for coming. We have an author, illustrator, agent combo. So Lori Richmond is an author, illustrator who's been on MomWrites before. And we are followed with the other Lori. They're both Loris today. Lori Kilkelly, who is Lori Richmond's agent. So it's nice to be able to have both sides of that coin for this conversation, you guys. So thank you and welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us. And our advice will apply to people that have names other than Lori.
Okay, good, because
Just
Are you sure you want to open it up that wide? I think we should probably be as specific as possible.
This podcast is only for Lori's. Actually, Lori Richmond, do you remember when I first started making my agent list, like back last year? I specifically sought out agents whose names were Abby, because you guys are not the only author agent combination with the same name that I know. Like, I know multiple.
What?
Yeah.
There are lots of Jennifers in agenting, lots and lots of Jennifers. And I think a lot of them work for a very respectable agency, Andrea Brown Literary. I think there's like 5. I could be wrong with that number, but there are multiple Jennifers, and I know they rep Jennifers too. So it's hilarious. I don't know if you know.
Molly Burnham is repped by a lady named Molly. And so I'm like, oh my God.
This is like a conference theme, I feel like.
Right? Well, there are 2 Abbeys that are out there. And when I was pitching my first book, the one I wrote with Jenny on the podcast, I believe I pitched them both and I never heard back from either one of them. And so maybe it's not meant to be as far as Abbeys are concerned. Maybe we need more agent Abbeys out there. Are we ready? Because Lori Richmond, I believe the first question on my list is for you.
I know, I saw that.
Yeah. So, all right, Lori Richmond, you're an author, illustrator, repped by Lori Kilkelly. I want to know, how'd you pitch her and how did you choose her? Because that has been really a big question that all the writers at work have been asking me, is like, how do you find your agents? And I want to know how you found Lori.
Yeah, so I'm going to have to answer that question twice, I think, because my first part of my answer will be I found Agent Lori through an unconventional way, and that was I didn't pitch her, it was through a referral. So a friend of mine, Lauren Castillo, who is an author illustrator as well, a Caldecott honoree, she's a friend of our family and we go back a while. And so she was sort of like helping me with my work as I was beginning. And she is repped by someone named Paul Rodin, who Lori Kilkelly used to work with. And so when I was sharing my work with Lauren, she said to me, you know, I think that you and Lori, who works with Paul, would really hit it off. So I was like, oh, okay, cool. So Lauren kind of connected us, and Lori and I had a wonderful phone conversation. And I loved how like Lori's background kind of jived with mine. She came from like corporate sales, and I could tell like she was going to be an awesome negotiator. Like no one was going to mess with her. But that she also, you know, was going to be someone who could provide a lot of editorial feedback to me. And that's something that I need because I consider myself an artist first. So it was kind of through that referral that Lori and I made the connection. And, you know, Lori liked my work and saw enough potential that, you know, wound up making me an offer to work with her. So, you know, had I not had this connection happen, I would be pitching. And so the second part of my answer is, you know, finding an agent, you know, you can start by looking at work that you like and see who reps those people. But make sure that kind of when you're doing your research, you look at the submission guidelines for the agent and you follow them, you know, pretty closely, because what you don't want to do is to sort of like mess up before you even have your foot in the door and not, you know, provide what they're asking for in the format that they're asking for. But, you know, I didn't have to do that. So that was one of the magical things about our meeting.
I want to interject because she says she didn't have to do that, but she in fact did send an email. Lauren made me aware that she was going to send an email to me, and I said that would be great. I looked at her work. I think you had your website up, Lori, at that point.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my gosh, this work is so cute. It's so captivating. I look for illustrations that really tell a story, and she had such funny, clever, interesting illustrations telling these stories that when she emailed me, I mean, when Lauren mentioned it, I was like, sure, you know, I have people make referrals. I'm pretty consistently, you know, everybody knows somebody. And so I think Richmond is undervaluing a little bit how much her work played into that referral, because people can get a referral, but at the end of the day, the work is what's going to sell you. I'm not doing Lauren, even though I love her, any favors by, you know, picking on someone whose work I didn't completely connect with. And I also was fairly new to agenting at that point. And so I had a I still have a small list by choice, but at the time I was really not taking on too many clients, but I was very new. So I had a lot of wiggle room in terms of how many people were already on my list, because I was being selective, but I did have some room there to take on someone new. The more senior an agent is, the more likely it is that they have a really full list of clients and can't afford time-wise to take on someone else. So don't let Richmond convince you that it was just some great connection that got her repped.
Kind of interesting because I was having a conversation with my friend Libby Hawker the other day. And so Libby actually writes historical fiction. So she doesn't swim in the same KidLit waters as like the three of us are swimming. But she had some really interesting things to say. And, you know, because I'm getting ready to sort of go back into the pitching, I wrote, just as my background is, I wrote a novel with Jenny Nash. That was my first novel, and I started pitching it and realized really quickly when I started writing my second novel what a hot mess that first novel still was. Like I had learned all sorts of stuff that I then turned around. I decided, you know what, I'm going to stop pitching this. Like I don't want to keep going with it. I'm going to pitch the better novel next. So I just focused all my attention on that other novel. So, I'm looking at jumping back into the slush piles. And what Libby told me was, she's like, you know what, slush piles are crazy, but I think you would have a better chance pitching in person, like at a conference, when agents come to the conference for like SCBWI, or I'm assuming other conferences like RWA or Thriller Fest. I know Thriller Fest does it, where agents come and you can pitch them in person. And she suggested that really as a better alternative to the slush pile and a better alternative to the dreaded Twitter pitch. So, like, what are your opinions about that, Lori, about being able to pitch in person at a conference? Do you think that's a better option?
Which Lori?
Oh, sorry, Lori Kilkelly, Agent Lori. You cannot tell that I'm looking at you, even though I'm looking at you.
I call her Agent Lori, so you can call her Agent Lori too.
Yeah.
Agent Lori.
And I call Lori Richmond. So yeah. I think that's really smart. I think that it's very difficult to rise to the top of the slush pile, because while it's very convenient to be able to send submissions electronically, and I, for one, and most agents, I think these days only take electronic submissions. We don't take mail. If someone mailed me a submission, I wouldn't even know what to do with it. So I haven't had a mailed submission in many, many years. So I do think that doing things like going to conferences and getting a critique from an agent is a great way to make connections. I would advise that hanging too much hope on that meeting will make it a lot more awkward than you want it to be, or that the agent wants it to be. I'd approach it in a more holistic way in terms of making the connections. And next time you see them at a conference, or next time you run into them at ALA or BEA, or whatever the case may be, you have that connection and you start building that network and that community, rather than looking at it like I've had people sit down with me and be pitching what I critiqued, and I'm giving them feedback on it, and they're like, well, you clearly don't like this, and try to send something like give me something else to review right there in front of them. That kind of approach, where instead of looking at it like, how can I get good feedback from an agent, it's possible they'll connect with my project, it's possible they won't. I think that's a healthier way to do it, to look at it more as a building block than as a potential match. But I understand that can be hard to do, to not look at things as an opportunity. I think that it's healthier if you don't hang too much on the fact that you're meeting with this agent face to face. It could be a fit, but it might not. Being at that conference in general is going to afford you the opportunity to interact with other authors, to interact with published authors, to meet editors, etc. So I think that that's just one of many ways to sort of build your platform and build your network in the writing community.
You realize that now this makes me want to physically mail a manuscript to Agent Lori. This is a joke.
I will literally put it in my circular file.
Right? You mean the recycling bin? Richmond?
Yeah, I was going to say that I think that's a great point. And that's actually something I did personally myself too. I went to it wasn't so much a conference. Like I think of a conference like, kind of like this big, large thing where you're listening to speakers in an auditorium type environment. But I did a workshop at Highlights Foundation, which for your KidLit writers, I would strongly recommend. And sometimes the format of the event itself can also have an effect on the relationships you'll be able to make there. Because sometimes like the larger conferences have more of like a speed dating type format where maybe you only get 10 minutes with, an agent or an editor or whatever. But the one that I happened to go to was, a couple of days long. It was very small. There were a few publishing industry experts there, and you really did get to have a relationship with those people. For me personally, it led to like a coffee meeting, 2 weeks later type of thing. So I would also just, if people have limited budget and can't attend every conference, which is most people, being a little bit discerning with the format might help you just find one that give you a little bit more quality time with someone.
And I think that these days, like I've heard one of the other regional SCBWIs did a thing, because everything's online now, and they were able to do like a Zoom meeting to pitch agents. So I had a girlfriend that was able to sign up for a slot, and I think she had maybe she got 2 or 3 slots to pitch an agent face to face. And so I don't know, I'm kind of hoping that that has sort of shifted, the pandemic has sort of shifted maybe the access that pitching writers, querying writers would have to do some of these face-to-face things, because you're right, not everybody has the budget to go. Not everybody has the time to go. Not everybody can get away from their family or their kids, or if they're taking care of a spouse or a parent, I mean, it's hard, but remote work now, I feel like that's been a savior. But so speaking of slush piles, Agent Lori, how do you handle yours? Because I think a lot of writers just assume that you spend all day every day as an agent combing through your slush pile looking for the next best thing.
No, I don't. I wish that I could spend more time in the slush pile. And I think that okay, so something that you said early on, I wanted to mention this because you mentioned that you wanted a straight answer, that there was a lot of differing opinions out there, or you hear different things. And I think the reason that is because this isn't like, well, I would use surgery as an example, where there's a set way to do something. Like, this is an industry where there is personal autonomy, agent to agent. There's certainly some structure in terms of what is good business practices, but in terms of how you operate, one agent might want something one way, whereas another agent wants something another way. And so I think part of the reason why people get confused and get very worried about whether they're doing it right or wrong is that there is no right or wrong. There might be a way that me, Agent Lori, is doing something versus the way that another agent is doing something. And so when I speak for myself, I think it's important to recognize that I own my agency. And so, especially with the past year, I haven't been able to have an assistant, which I don't recommend. I started my agency in the fall of 2018 and was kind of getting ramped up and hoping to bring someone on board, in the spring last year, which clearly did not happen. I wasn't comfortable having someone in my office. And the help that I need is assistant work, not assistant agent work, like somebody to do filing and, maybe somebody who knows how to do social media, that kind of thing, because I have no time. So I, as a business owner, am responsible for everything. I do everything from the social media to the accounting to the contract review to the editing and submissions. So there are so many things on a daily basis. And even if you're not someone who even if an agent isn't owning their own business, many of us do work, kind of in our own offices. So even a person who works for a larger agency has to review their contracts. It still has, their personal accounting to do for their business expenses. So we just have so many different things and wear so many different hats as an agent. I had one client make a pie chart that I wish I had thought to look at it, make a pie chart of what I'm responsible for. And it was quite a lot of things. And I looked at it and thought it was really funny. And then I realized that it didn't even have submissions on the pie chart. I'm like, this is like the main thing I do. And she said, well, that goes without saying.
Oh my gosh.
So, we sorry, to get back to your original question, the slush pile. Unfortunately, I just don't have a lot of time. And so I do have an autoresponder on my slush pile. If they follow my submission guidelines and go to the right email address, they will get a response that says that I only respond if I think that it's something that I am interested in pursuing. I don't require or request exclusive submissions. I think I'm not a big fan of that. I feel like, I think it's a lot easier for agents to find clients than it is for a author to find an agent. And so making it an exclusive submission is, I'm just not, that was how I was raised in the business. And so I don't request or require that. I do think it's fair to ask for time to finish reading something if you were reading a full when someone else offers representation or you receive an offer from an editor. So I wish that I could say, oh, I spend all day every day, but the fact is we get thousands of submissions. I mean, thousands of submissions, and it's just not possible. That ease of access has made it virtually impossible to respond to everyone. And I have read responses, on Twitter and that kind of thing, where people are quite angry that they feel that it is, professional to respond to every query, but it's sort of a trade-off. Would you like to have open submissions where you have a shot, or would you like for the agent to be closed to submissions and only do submissions by request? So it's a difficult balance. Everybody does it a little bit differently. I have too many other things to be spending a ton of time, and I also have a pretty full list. That doesn't mean I never take on someone new, but it's unfortunately not possible, or I wouldn't sleep to respond to everyone personally.
So I think that that's a piece that a lot of writers really need to hear an agent say. They hear other people say it, but I think they need to hear an agent say it, because you send out these queries and then you sit and then you wait and you wait, and it feels like a long time. It feels like longer than it actually is oftentimes, because
Sure.
you're playing the waiting game. And you make up all these stories in your head about what's happening on the other side of that email. And we're writers, which means we're really good at making up stories, most of us, even if they're totally untrue and totally unrealistic. And so I think having that piece straight from the horse's mouth is what a lot of writers need to hear in order to sort of regain some of that patience with the process. I mean, I've told myself, when it comes to what happens from the time that you finish to the time that your work actually becomes a book, you have to have patience with that. There is no deadline. Words don't expire like milk in the fridge. And so once you have it and you're ready to move forward, you have to be open to changing it. You have to be open to, the length of time that it takes in order to get what you want. You just can't be chomping at the bit. And that's so hard. Like it's so easy to say, but it is so hard to feel. And so
I think the thing of that is that while it's difficult while you're waiting on agents to respond, it's important to recognize that in the next step, when you are represented, you're going to have the same requirements of patience from editors who you're on submission to, and from art directors who maybe haven't gotten back to you in as timely a way as you were hoping to hear back from them. I think that one of the tools in an author skill set is learning to work through that impatience, not by being patient, but by actually working. I think patience is so difficult, but you have to be able to work while you're waiting, because otherwise, what are you even doing? Like, work on the next thing.
I'm so excited that you said that, because this question was not on my list, but I wrote it on my list this morning because so I referred earlier to this conversation I had with my friend Libby the other day. And she actually gave me this like super solid, I think, piece of advice that really touches on what you just said, Agent Lori, in that she said, it's going to behoove you more and you are going to be more, I guess, attractive to agents if, as you're sitting and you're waiting, you keep working and you keep amassing stories and you have stories under your belt. And maybe your first one doesn't get picked up and your second one doesn't get picked up and you're still pitching and you're still writing. If by the time you actually get agented, if you pitch them your most like commercially viable work and they say, "Oh, Abby, I love this." And you say, "Oh yeah, you love this, Agent Lori?" Well, boom. And then you drop 3 more that are on brand right in her lap. You are going to be her new favorite person because you've just handed her something that's easier to sell than one. Do you think that's kind of a solid strategy?
I do. I would say that 2 things. First of all, a caveat in the keep working. I do not recommend that you keep working on the project that you are out on submission with, because I have absolutely received submissions and then a week, 2 weeks, a month later received an email saying, "I've actually been working on this and I've updated it and here it is again." And I not to say that that's a terrible thing to do and that I wouldn't review the new one instead of the old one if I hadn't already done it. More saying, I think that people go out with the submission too soon. And that's something that, is an answer to a different question that you asked. But I would say try very hard, because I work with all of you authors and I know that it's really hard to stop working on that project that you've been working on. But really put it down. If it's ready to go on submission, put it down, put it away, and work on the new thing, which is what you were talking about. Mm-hmm. And in terms of dropping the new thing, it depends on what age level you're talking about. I would say, rather than just dropping it on an agent, because it's almost like you're giving them an opportunity to review something more when they already liked what you had. So if it's a picture book, that's one thing. If it is a middle grade novel or a YA novel, I would say, I'm actually working on additional projects. I have this one is in this state of readiness. This one I've just written, my critique partners are reviewing it. So I wouldn't necessarily just drop them in the agent's lap without solicitation, because look, they're about to make an offer to you, it sounds like, so showing that you're ready and have something there that is ready to go next is great, but don't shift focus from what they're already excited about, is kind of my feeling.
I think what she meant was, once you get picked up and you have representation,
yes,
that if you have a sort of a group of titles that you can then say, okay, like this is what I have, that you're attractive to, and easier to sell, because, and I love, because you can tell she walks in both traditional and self-publishing, because she used the words on brand. And so, because that was one of the things that she's talked to me about a couple times now, is saying, don't go off and write a chapter book that sounds very different from the book that you think you're going to be able to sell. Like, try and keep your voice the same. Try and have. So, like, what do you think about that? Like, if we're going to circle this back to me for a second, like, because I actually know it was an audience question that was on my list about, and maybe I'll just read Sarah's question, because that's it. This is very MG specific. So anyone who's listening that you're not writing MG, this question might not apply to you. She said she wants to know your thoughts, Agent Lori, on a strategy for querying if you have finished manuscripts in more than one age group and or genre. And I think that's kind of what I'm talking about here.
It's a good question. And I don't know that there is necessarily one right answer. I will say that middle grade, oftentimes when a publisher begins publishing you, they like you to, as you kind of alluded to, they like you to stay in that lane. So for example, I represent Stacey McAnulty, whose debut middle grade was The Miscalculations of Lightning Girl. And she had an idea for another book, and they kind of steered her toward keeping a school setting for her next book, which she did. And she's done now 3 titles, all of which, kind of take place in middle school. That's the setting, which is great. And Stacey is very adaptable, very professional. She writes all the time, as Richmond can attest. The two of them are friends. But she also writes all different things. And she writes picture books, both fiction and nonfiction. We have queried a young adult novel for her. She has done chapter books. So I really hesitate to kind of shoehorn an author into writing something that they don't want to write. And so I do think that it's not a terrible idea to consider the fact that, if Penguin Random House or Macmillan or Simon & Schuster want you to write another book that is in a similar vein as your prior book that they published, that's not surprising. But it's also not to say that that's all you should write. And so I totally understand why she's saying that. But I also think writers are going to write. They want to write what they want to write, and they want to write what is interesting and appealing to them. So maybe my response is a little unconventional, but I would prefer that my authors are writing things that they're passionate about. And so, maybe I'd say, well, you could do both. Could you do another middle grade that's the same as your prior one, but also do something else that you want to do? I think that the best work comes from people who are writing things that they're excited and interested in writing. And so I do hesitate to quote unquote, force you into writing something that, you did that and you're done with that for the moment. In terms of querying, I generally don't pick someone up for multiple projects. Let me say this a little bit differently. I rep an author's whole career, but I don't usually read 2 novel length projects for them before signing them. So while I think it's a good idea to say, I have another one that's similarly marketable in this vein, it's, at this stage of readiness, I also have something that has more of a fantasy bent, and it's, So I think that, showing that you recognize that there are different ages, that there are different genres, and being clear about the fact that you like to write in that way is better. Why do you want to be represented by, and if you want to write multiple different things, why do you want to be represented by someone who isn't going to be excited about that on down the road? You won't be excited about the fact that they rep you if they aren't game to rep the various things that you write, right?
That's so okay. I love hearing you say that, because again, we're going to circle this back around to me, which is the greatest part of being able to host a podcast is you get to direct the question. But I love hearing that because, I wrote my first book with Jenny, which I started to query, and then very quickly wrote a second one, which I realized was better. So I stopped querying the first one and I kind of shelved it and let it sit. And then as I was waiting for the second one to be developmentally edited, I wrote a chapter book. I loved writing that chapter book. There was something about it that I was just like, this is magical. I love kids this age. I think it's great. And so I then sent that off to be developmentally edited. And the editor said, well, I can tell you write for upper middle grade. She was like, you have a lot of work to be done on this chapter book. And so, we started talking about Lexile levels, and being a former teacher, of course, I was all over that, like white on rice. And so I was like, oh yeah. Like, give me more strategies. Like, this is a puzzle. This is a game. Like, I want to figure this out because I am really enjoying it. And I'm really enjoying, the character that I wrote. But then I was encouraged to put that away. because I was told, you know, that's not going to make you any money. That's not going to get you picked up. No agent is going to pick you up for that chapter book. You're going to have 10 of those chapter books outlined before somebody's even going to want to see it. And so I sort of tucked that back in the drawer. And I think I've been kind of discouraged by it because I thought, why can't I write both of those things? Like, why can't I make that one match my voice? Like, if there's a love of the character and a love of the process, like, why can't that be there for everything?
I think that's a different kind of, so I think that's probably more of a strategy than necessarily you can't write that chapter book. I think the reason there is for chapter books, it has to be a series. I mean, like there's very rarely anything but series chapter books out there. And you have to be able to write them really fast. Chapter books generally have to be written. You'd have to write 2 in the first year usually, and then 1 a year after that. And so if the series gets picked up, but very few chapter books series actually do well enough to continue going. They're often published in paperback, or they go to paperback very quickly, you know, with a little short stint in hardcover. So the advances for them are lower, which means that your royalties are lower, which means that it's less likely to be something that you would get picked up by an agent for right off the bat, unless you have like some wild, awesome, marketable idea that nobody's done before. Chapter books are just really risky. And so in looking at it, it's more your aim. Like, will an agent pick you up for a chapter book series? I probably wouldn't, but that doesn't mean that when you get an agent for your middle grade that you couldn't then sell your chapter book series. Does that make sense? So
yeah,
not necessarily don't spend any time and effort on it, but recognizing the business aspect of it being that it's not as viable to sell for a new author, or it won't sell for potentially as much as a solid middle grade. And that's probably why less about, you know, an agent wanting to rep chapter books or loving chapter books, or you writing what you love and also being, I mean, anybody who sells a middle grade, you know, can also go on submission with the chapter book. It's more about you finding an agent and being more of a marketable author with a solid middle grade than with a chapter book series. Does that make sense at all? So I think
it does. And like to dig in with Sarah's question, because the lady who asked the question about the different ages, like I know enough about her background to know, you know, she's an author only picture book writer, which I know, right, Lori Richmond, that's harder to break into the industry if you're just author only, which she knows, but she has a PhD in math. And so she's written some nonfiction STEM books. She's written some picture book only books. She's written a middle grade novel that she's working on right now, revising, but she also has an idea for YA. And so I think she feels kind of a little bit all over the map and doesn't really know where to put her focus if she wants to break into the industry. And I think that's what it boils down to for a lot of us. Like, we all have this love of writing, and we all want to do it because we love it and we love our characters and we love the process. But also, we have to stop and think, what is that strategy? Like, what is that strategy to get your foot in the door? And so if you're looking at the whole range of KidLit, from picture books all the way up to YA, if she has her foot in each of those, or if she has her fingers in each of those pots, is one pot right now better than others or easier than others to get into? Like, is there one that people are chomping at the bit more for than the rest?
I think that middle grade is very popular right now. And so middle grade is very popular right now. But that's not to say, and so is STEM, so is nonfiction, especially nonfiction that is unique in some way. So, picture book biographies, not to say that there won't always be picture book biographies. And there's some really wonderful picture book biographies being done on people who have, historically been underrepresented, be they females or people of color. But all in all, you hear from editors quite a bit that picture book bios are oversaturated at the moment. So STEM picture book texts and middle grade are both very popular. That said, an agent might have specific things that they're looking for. So I think that, I like to encourage people to work on what they feel called on to work on. But that said, if there are specific agents you're interested in working with and you're reviewing their submission guidelines, or you get to hear them at a conference virtually or otherwise, or you're at a highlights camp with them, kind of homing in on what they are expressing interest in seeing. Because we all have there are various sites that have, what is it, MSWL, manuscript wish list.
Yeah.
And so, look for people who are looking for what you're writing and try to connect it. I understand that you're looking for a, light fantasy that takes place and blah, blah, so that's how I would do it. If there's as you're researching, kind of a multi-pronged approach, write what you want to write, but also look for people who are interested in repping what you write.
I have two questions. Let's see if I can remember the second one after I ask the first one, which is usually my problem. So I know a lot of the writers from work were asking me questions about query letters. And we can't find what's supposed to go in a query letter. That information is everywhere. What I really want is the dirt, which are, what are your pet peeves to see in a query letter?
My biggest pet peeve is not following the submission guidelines. I think that everybody has their submission guidelines online now. Very, very few agents don't. And so not following the guidelines, and I don't mean I don't know, people get very worked up about things that aren't as important, but things like using the right email address. It's right there. And I will still get submissions to info@LK and my personal email at LK. And I'm like, and if they do that, they won't get the response. They won't get the autoresponder that tells them what to expect. That is probably my biggest pet peeve is this. And there are people who will reach out on social media, on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, and say, I have this really great project and I want you to review it. And I'm like, website. It's go to the website and look at my submission guidelines and see if I'm repping the kind of work that you're interested in writing. So that's the biggest thing. The other thing I think that I don't love to read, and I've said this before, is someone telling me that it's their first novel, that it's their first project, that it's their first novel, because I don't think that's relevant or important. It's like waving a flag that says, I'm new here, I'm probably submitting too early. And I don't think you're doing yourself any favors by doing that. So rather than saying, this is my first novel, I would say, I'm an unpublished author. I've written extensively. Here is, what I'm doing. I am a member of this organization. I have received an award here. I have a critique group that I meet with. I have polished this manuscript. It's been rewritten 20,000 times. I don't know, but saying to someone who you're looking to represent you professionally, that you've never done this before and it's your first manuscript, but hey, you're giving it a shot, it's not relevant and it's not selling you. So I definitely kind of shake my head when I read that, thinking, you don't need to tell me that. Sell me, what you're good at and what you've done to make yourself viable for representation, why you're ready to be represented.
Lori Richmond, you told me actually the exact same thing when I said, what are your like tips and tricks for querying? I think the only thing you said to me was, you follow every one of their GD rules. You were like,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's, you almost want to think of it like a job application, right? Like if you were going to apply for a traditional job, you would want, you wouldn't say like, this is my first time at the rodeo. Like everything that Lori just said translates conceptually to what you would want to put in your query letter. And I would also suggest have your critique group read your query letter as well, and have them critique it just as they would with manuscripts, because they're going to be able to see it in a way that you can't.
yeah, I know when you said that to me the first time, I had a good chuckle because in my former life, I was a teacher. And I'll tell you what teachers are notorious for not doing, and that's following other people's instructions. They like to give the instructions. They do not like to have to adhere to other people's instructions. And so I had a good chuckle because when I was first teaching, someone told me that, and that opened my eyes to it. And I would always pay attention at faculty meetings and things like that and think, they're right. Teachers are crap at following instructions. And so I always made a point to be really good at following instructions. And I was like, oh, I got this. I can do this. And I double checked with that first round. Oh man, I triple checked before I pressed send, because I thought, I don't want to be bounced for not putting the word query in the title of my subject, because
I also think like people think that, or maybe people are not thinking in general about this, but like there's a reason that you're being asked to do that. And from my perception, right, as somebody who would be like the one doing the querying, I would assume like this person on the other end, receiving end, is trying to make life easier because they do want to go through all of these queries. So if I don't follow the directions, I'm only going to make it harder on myself and put myself at a disadvantage, because I'm either right, exactly, yeah. Exactly, or just to be thrown out for not, following the directions. So, and I also think because we're all creative, right? We want to be like extra, like, oh, well, I know it said don't send a fruit basket, but I'm gonna do it anyway. Like, don't send the GD fruit basket. Just don't do it. Like, this is not your time to be extra. This is your time to just follow exactly what it says to a T.
I just want to say, if once you're represented, you want to send a fruit basket, I
send it.
I enjoy a fruit basket.
Maybe with a bottle of wine shoved in the fruit.
Liquid fruit.
Oh, I thought you meant like fruit basket, red wine. Great. No? Okay.
Like, I think of all the automation that's out there. So it's very possible that if Agent Lori says, put the word query in the subject of your email, and you don't put the word query, it could possibly be that the computer kicks your submission and she never sees it. Not because she's ignoring it, but because you didn't follow the instructions and it didn't make it past the AI gatekeeper, Mm-hmm. I mean, it could be something really super simple like that I think we just need to be aware of. And not everyone is aware that technology exists. I've learned that. I'm sort of still shocked by that. But that, I mean, it could be simple. Again, so then we tell ourselves, oh, Agent Lori is ignoring me, or Agent Lori hated my submission. Agent Lori just never saw it.
You also asked if there were any other pet peeves. I don't know if you want me to talk about that a little bit.
Oh, give me all the pet peeves, because this is the fun stuff to listen to.
So this is a really obvious one, and most of your authors are probably going to be like, duh, we've heard that, and of course we'd never do that. But I get all of us get a lot of submissions that comp their manuscript to a bestseller, not in terms of the content, but rather how the sales of the project are going to be like unbelievable, and it's going to sell like Harry Potter, only better, and it's sure to sell. And the fact is that even the projects that we like love and cannot wait to send out and get multiple offers from editors, even those sometimes don't sell well. You cannot predict how well your project is going to sell. And it's a false claim. And there's something about it that because it's a false claim and we work in this business, it's so distasteful. No one wants to hear it. I'm okay with somebody comping the project to, although I think there's better things these days to comp to, but comping it to Harry Potter if you also have a young boy who is, a wizard. Fine, but explain that. Don't say it because of the number of sales that you're sure to get, saying in quotation marks, sure to get. And you'd be shocked how much we get that in our submissions. We also, I say we as agents, and I can say we because we're all on the email, which is a mass email submission to a bunch of agents. It's best when we're all in the to line and someone clicks reply all and asks them to remove them from the, but even the BCC, like, do not do a mass submission to multiple agents and editors and expect to get any kind of response at all. So these seem like there aren't too many things in a submission that make me just write somebody off, but comping to a bestseller in terms of how great and amazing and bestsellery your book's going to be is one of them. And the mass submission is another. So these are really egregious things. Like, I do feel like if you follow the rules to the best of your ability, I'd prefer you don't spell my name Kilkenny instead of Kilkelly, but it happens all the time because autocorrect is a total pain in the neck. It's not going to make me not read your submission, but it's a good idea to get used to proofing and that sort of thing. It's really the egregious stuff that makes us eye roll.
No one will ever see my face in that video, but I feel like both of those things you just talked about made my jaw drop because I thought, wait, like people would do that? Like people would, number one, be presumptuous enough to say my book is going to sell as well as Harry Potter.
Oh, yeah.
That seems like a crazy asinine thing to say to begin with. I mean, we all hope and dream that, but to put it in your query seems odd, but it has never occurred to me to mass email anyone my submission. I don't even think I mass emailed it to beta readers. When I even a beta reader, I sent it to each person individually with a note that thanked them for reading it. And so that's crazy.
You're working with in a critique group or in a professional setting, people who are actually listening to podcasts, they're not the ones who are like doing the work. These are not the people who are making these kinds of kind of egregious errors. I don't know that it needs to be said, but anything that was, sexist, racist, homophobic, that would be an immediate pass. I think these are things that are so egregious though. And I almost say it to say the worst thing that you can do, in my opinion, as a new writer is put more emphasis on being represented than on homing your writing skills. Because if that is your aim and all you really care about is getting represented, the emphasis is on the wrong thing. And that I would say it's not an egregious, terrible thing, but I don't know too many authors who look back and think, oh God, I submitted way too early. Like I was so not ready for representation when I began submitting. The focus shift is so important. And I can't really emphasize that enough. The focus shift is one of the biggest things.
Okay, so here's my last question. Okay, so I have a pet peeve when working with writers, and it circles back to when you said comps, talking about comps in a query letter, which made me realize I have yet another question about comps. And while I have somebody who I know can actually answer that question, I want to ask it really quick. So one of my pet peeves is when writers tell me they don't have any comps for their story. And I'm like, BS, people. Everybody's got a comp for their story. And so I know when I think about my story, I think about my story as like it's like Pippi Longstocking meets Dr. Dolittle. And I always thought that was a great comp because not that those were current stories that are, you know, like selling millions of copies right now, but it very quickly puts in the agent or the listener's head, oh, I kind of have a really good grasp of what Abby's book is about. But I've pretty recently been told that because those books weren't written within the last 2 years, those are terrible comps to use. And so where do you fall on the idea of comps? Like, how current does it need to be? Because the comps that were being thrown at me for my current book by the developmental editor I just had were books I'd never heard of. I went to Amazon, I looked them up. They had 12 reviews and they're 2 years old. And I thought, those aren't very good comps because no one has probably read them. So anybody who's reading this might go, oh, I have no idea what that book is. So it doesn't do its job.
I think that I fall firmly in the you have to have a current comp. They don't both have to be current, but I think that part of the work of being an author isn't just writing, it's reading and reading current work and reading as much as you possibly can in the genre that you're writing. So in that way, I would say part of what an author should be doing is looking for comps to read, whether they have 12 reviews or 100 reviews or 1,000 reviews. You know, I think that it's not a bad idea to try to find something that has a few more reviews than 10 to 12. A lot of times I'm not an Amazon shopper. I like to shop independent. That said, I'm not above using Amazon's site to direct me and learn more about different books. And so if you have one of those comps you mentioned, you could also see customers who bought this also bought, and you will get books that are similar. And you can also use your social media for good by saying, hey, has anyone read this? Or I'm looking for a comp to a book like Pippi Longstocking, but more current. I think 2 years that's tough. 2 years that's very small. I think 5 is fine. And really, I don't have a problem with using an older book or movie if it helps to shape your pitch. Now that could change. You could hear something different from another agent, but that won't bother me. I think that being able to pitch your book as a this times this or this times this times this, that's a great thing to be able to do. And if you are reading the work in a comparable that is comparable to your work, that you should be able to do that you should be able to find something. And I have heard people argue with agents about whether they need to be reading current work. And it's not something that I'll argue about. I'll just simply say, you have to be reading current work, in the last 5 years. And as much as you can, it's part of your job as an author, in my opinion.
You guys have been awesome. Thank you. Thank you very much for coming.
Thanks for the great questions.
Well, I am so glad you guys put my feet to the fire and made me come up with some ahead of time, because it was actually really fun. I'm going to have to do that, I think, more often now when I have people come in and come on the podcast. So
it's definitely helpful to be able to review and not just spit it all out. So it is nice to be able to get them in advance. I appreciate that.
Yeah. So anyway, thank you guys for coming. Thank you for your time. Lori Richmond, always good to see your face.
Good to see you
Lori
too.
Kilkelly, nice to see your face for the first time. So thank you.
Nice to meet you.